Knowing what I knowin', while the black band's sweating, in the rhythm I'm rolling. Gotta give us what we want, gotta give us what we need.
Bits and pieces of the educational system in the United States. The phone number is 524-8920, 524-8920, and today's topic this Thursday evening is on education. We might branch off depending on how much time we have, but our main focus for the topic today is the educational system. And it could be from the high school and middle school all the way up to the college, university levels. And you can start off with our guests will be talking about, we're going to try to cover some of the historical context to the educational system, what it was made for, as we as consumers not really being educated but being trained. And that's why I call ourselves consumers of that product that corporate and government officials is having us consume. And then Kurt is going to cover this for about 30 minutes and talk about some of the things that he think are good or negative pertaining to the changes or the elimination of certain teaching tools. So you go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for having me here again. It's a pleasure to be here again. We were here last week, and I don't know how many people saw it, but we decided that it'd be good to do just a quick sort of overview of what we talked about last week, and one of the things that I felt was important to discuss was, if we're going to get into the problems of education, the things that we have to do, at least for a little bit of time, is look at the roots of the causes. And when we started off last time, it was just, I said first things first is that with a topic like education, people get caught up in this altruistic way of thinking, right? I think I mentioned that last time, and I said, and it actually trips us up, it confuses us, because what we then end up doing is we try to think our way through while, lining up all of our arguments with good intentions, and that gets to be really confusing for most people, because we just feel like, well, we're trying to help our kids, we're trying to help our families, we're trying to help the economy, we're trying to help, but we're not giving a lot of thought to where all this came from, why the problems still exist today, because we're confusing this with altruism, we're confusing this with good intentions. And one of the things that we really do have to understand is that the history of education, of public education, did not really start off with the best of intentions, or at least it didn't stay there for very long if it was there to begin with. So early on, and I won't spend a lot of time with this, but early on it was about, from Thomas Jefferson, it was about a few years of school offered to people in Virginia, for kids in Virginia, and what he called, he wrote this right into the law, he said, of the rubbish, and he's talking about poor people, of the rubbish, there will be one kid chosen from each school that will go on to an advanced education. So there was already this predisposition to, we don't really care about those people, right? I mean, even when he was talking about how the masses need to have some level of understanding of reading and literacy so that we can have a democratic society, it really did not get into, it didn't get to that level where people really truly could be critical questioners, critical examiners of their own society. That they really weren't intending for it to be at that level, okay? Fast forward a bit, and some of the main historical figures in education, all they end up saying collectively, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but they end up saying that what we need to do, so we're talking about Horace Mann, we're talking about John D. Rockefeller, we're talking about Carnegie, what we need to do is get people on board so that basically they can, one, politically assimilate, and that's what Horace Mann spoke about repeatedly.
Correct.
And two, we would like for them to be our workers. And what that means is that we're going to hire people who can follow directions and do what we tell them to do, and so that the John D. Rockefellers, A, don't have competition, because they don't want any more Rockefellers. What they want is people to work for them and make them wealthier. And this is not some sort of a radical argument. These were said outright. I mean, John D. Rockefeller said, in our ideal situation, we would have docile people who we could mold in our own imagination. I mean, he said those words, right? And if we fast forward to today, the language hasn't changed all that much either. If we look at something that maybe a lot of you have heard of the Common Core, right on the front page of the website, it says that this is about global competition. And our governor says that, our politicians said it repeatedly. You know, I've heard even teachers saying that to each other, and it makes my brain rattle, because this is the same level of social control that was going on early in our history of public education.
Well, if you use employment, global economy sent jobs overseas.
Right, yeah.
So it's another form of how they set up the system
Right.
to benefit them.
You know, if you ask kids, if you ask families, if you ask people in general, what's the purpose of education? Jobs, right? It's to get kids to get jobs. So it used to be you go to, up through high school, you graduate high school, if you were lucky to do so, you graduate high school and you end up getting a job. And more recently it's become, now you have to go to college and then you can get a job. But it's always about, we use this language all the time, college ready. We're trying to get kids college ready, right? And then once you get to college, what's going on is we're basically setting up kids so that they can more or less be part of either the technological or the financial districts in terms of private industry, corporations, right? This is a corporate endeavor, and it has been for a long time. It's been the captains of industry saying this is what has to happen with education. We have to get people to become the workers, and the jobs themselves have changed. We more or less don't have manufacturing as a base anymore in our country. This is what you're talking about. Manufacturing, because of a profit motive, has been moved out of our country into poorer parts of the world. So the exploitation that's going on there is just obscene. Just as a side note, when you're talking about what people are going through there, you go to a mall in Connecticut or anywhere in the country, and what you're basically buying is human exploitation products. People who are working 18, 20 hours or 16, 18 hours, and they're mostly, kids. They're 14 through, 20 years old, and they're living in these mass dorm situations, and they're suicidal, and it's really horrible what's going on in these sweatshop situations. And that's what we don't have that because it's cheaper to do that there, right? So we halfway around the world, so we distance ourselves from that. So what's left? Well, we have service, right? So a lot of kids and families and adults go into sort of a service-oriented job, or the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Right? And that's what's been sort of shoved down our throats as, well, that's the right way, that's the right thing that we have to do. And it's not to say that those jobs don't exist, they do, but that's where our society is going. We're no longer a manufacturing society, so you can't prepare kids for an assembly line. You've got to prepare them for a STEM job, right? That's a lot of what the focus is on these days.
Right.
So, with that said,
what I find this real tricky is if you look at the immigration policy, when you have certain groups being recruited, whether you want to call it a work visa or education visas, and those individuals are to take those STEM jobs, but they're telling you we're training you for the STEM jobs when they're recruiting immigrants to take those jobs, and then the jobs that you can do and make a living wage is being exported out to other countries.
Yeah, just on that note, when you go to college, it's at least 4 years of education, right? And for a lot of kids, it's 5 to 6 years, right? So I work at Central, and we look at the 6-year graduation rate. People come in and 6 years later, how are we doing in terms of them graduating in 6 years? Not 4 years, but 6 years. And the goal is to get them out the door in 4 years. Don't get us wrong, right? But that's how a lot of colleges actually look at their success rate, is within the 6-year window. That being said, what happens in the careers over the course of 4 to 6 years, there's a lot of change. So people get in, and by the time they choose what they want to focus on, their major, and by the time they get themselves out the door, that field might have changed, and that happens quite a bit. So the immigrant workers that you're talking about, the visas, who are coming over from various, Asian countries and whatnot, they're filling gaps that aren't, maybe our programs in our own universities aren't really geared towards, right? So, but there isn't this, like, when we talk about this, there's this sense, there's this stereotypical sense that somehow they're coming over and taking our jobs, and that's not the case at all. In fact, we're not actually, we don't really have a situation of shortage in STEM, even though a lot of people talk about that, like we're going to have all these jobs, they're going to all be STEM oriented and blah, blah, blah. But nationally speaking, we actually have an overflow of graduates who aren't getting jobs in the STEM fields as much as we think that there's a shortage.
Right.
And I know we talk about in Connecticut, like in the next 10, 15 years, the jobs that are going to be created here, that are projected to be created here, are going to be STEM oriented. So, and I'm not saying that won't be the case. It may very well be the case, but right now it's not as promising of a field as a lot of times talked about.
Well, I think that what you're talking about is very complex, because it might not sound complex, but when you put in the variables of all the stuff that you haven't even mentioned yet because of time, it's very complicated. Because if you take, for instance, what's going on in the West Coast, you have high-tech firms in the West Coast that is promoting, recruiting high school students to do high-tech employment. And so you're talking about somebody that's 18 years old working at a $40,000 hour, or I should say a year, $40,000 a year job, and it's not to benefit that young person. They're selling it to get young people off the streets.
Yeah.
As we know, if you look at the stats, young people is the highest unemployed group besides seniors in the country. So what they want to do is push the older workers, the over 40 workers out, because they build up perks and salaries and pension and all that stuff, and they can pay somebody cheaper, and it looks good that we're hiring youths.
Yeah.
But the real purpose is to push the older people out, and then when those jobs get filled up, then there's another plan, because everything is prearranged.
Yeah.
So they have a stage 1 to stage 2, stage 3, and all that, and we're looking at the stage 1, and we're not looking at what is heading down the pipes.
Yeah, right. And a really good example of, I think, a school that I'm aware of that is looking down the pipeline a bit more. Out in South Central LA, there's a school. It's a charter school. Okay, charter schools, we can talk about them in various ways, but this particular charter school is focusing on working with kids who are dealing with a lot of gang issues, a lot of violence, poverty issues, and they take the kids into the school, and what the kids end up learning is how to install solar panels, how to work with aquaponics, how to do things that are geared more towards sustainability. Okay, so they're getting a skill set that is an up-and-coming skill set, and especially in Southern California, where they're doing some more work around this, they are getting, they're graduating and they're getting these kind of jobs. Now, think about all the pluses that go with that, right? I mean, they're learning math, they're learning science, they're learning, some of their arts that they're doing is geared around some of that stuff. They're learning gardening, they're learning things that are actually, in the long run, going to help our society become more sustainable. And then they, who would normally just be left behind, kicked to the curb, they're getting opportunities that they wouldn't normally get. I mean, that's an example, I think, of what we're talking about here of, if we're going to do this kind of work, I think we have to do this in a far more caring way and really take into account the fact that we have a lot of major problems in the planet.
But
this is our education towards that.
Yeah, but it comes back to why it's complex, because for every solution, there's unintentional consequences. So you're hiring, and I'll give you a company so you don't think this is hypothetical. Disney
Yeah.
is a company that's hiring young teenagers and paying them at a high rate for their age group.
Yeah.
But the unintentional or intentional consequences to push the older workers out.
Right.
So it looks good. Okay, we're getting these kids off the street, and what we're going to do that a 40-year-old or 42-year-old person that's still productive,
Right.
and is still saving their retirement money, and they're putting money for their children to go to college, pushing them out.
Right.
Now you can, if you're a Republican or conservative, you can say, well, they should be starting on building their own business and stop relying on employers and the government. The problem is the loopholes on starting your own business, the higher of high taxes, the regulations that's causing people to give up in that first 5 years of trying to get their business off the ground. And then this competition that they say is necessary for capitalism. And I always tell people, competition makes good products, but make poor human beings.
Yeah.
Because if you start doing cutthroat capitalism, which is competition, is I'm going to try my hardest to hurt you so I can make profit. So I might make a good product, but my intention is destroying you to make the profit.
Right.
And then they'll look at it, they'll present it as your production and the thing that you produce was lousy, and that's why your business failed. That's not why your business failed all the time.
Well, yeah, and this is a little bit off topic from education, but
Right.
but it's an important one because I think it talks about the larger climate, which is that stockholders can sue their companies if they're not maximizing profits. So if Whirlpool can find a way to save a nickel on every washing machine that they make, and they don't save that nickel, then legally the stockholders can sue them and say,
Right.
look, why didn't you do that? And in many cases, saving that nickel means somebody doesn't have a job now.
Right.
So there's a lot of complications here that play into what we have. We've had major job loss since 2000, since signing on to things like NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. All these international trade agreements that we get involved in have meant less jobs available for us, even though the promise was always more jobs,
Right.
more, a greater marketplace to sell these things to, and it hasn't played out that way at all. What it's always meant is that the super wealthy of our country who own these giant corporations can now go to places that they couldn't go to before and use cheaper labor. That's exactly what it means. That's what it meant consistently. So, GM closes up its plant in Detroit and then moves to Mexico, right? And that's not calling out Mexicans for anything. That's what he did because it's going to save them, or it's going to make them more profits because they can have cheaper labor.
And the funny thing about it, and everything ties in, if you go to the federal government, Obama hired a senior management from General Electric to head his job growth programs initiative for the United States. This guy from General Electric, I'm sorry, not General Motors. He's known for laying off people.
Right.
Not only did he lay off the United States workers, but he built a plant, his company built a plant in China, and then he educated the Chinese, and that means GE poured in over $1 billion to build the plant and educate Chinese to work the plant. And this is the guy Obama hired to create jobs here.
Yeah, right.
When his whole history is creating jobs, and using the media, the corporate wealth to create jobs for other countries.
Right. And this is, how does this tie into education? The corporate model has been driving, the business model has been driving education for not just decades, but since at least the late 1800s. Okay, I mean, this is not a new concept. This is not new practices in the way that we do education. This is the way that things have gone, and I think that's why I started off with. If you talk to people in general, they have two things that they think about education. You know, oh, I support teachers, I support schools, I support kids, I support the whole thing, right? Okay, so. Yeah, I'm a teacher educator. I work at CCSU. I work in teacher education department. I prepare teachers. That's what I do. Okay, but I have a critical view because I see what's going on largely in schools, and that schools are really geared towards making workers, and that's a problem. That's a big problem because I think on the surface people would say, well, what's the problem? Why is it? You know, shouldn't people be? Isn't that more opportunity? You know, higher salary, right? Kids who graduate high school don't get paid as much as kids who graduate college, and and so forth. And okay, that's true, but Lord knows at this point there is no guarantee that jobs are available, right? A lot of people, as you were saying before, graduate college and there's no jobs for them, even at that higher level quality of education. So there has to be there has to be a real shift in terms of thinking about what education can be, and it's going to coincide with the way that we think about ourselves as a society. Okay, so if we keep thinking that the best way to do business is with these large transcontinental corporations, then this top-heavy system is going to collapse. I think most of us know that. I think most of us know that this is a very shaky system. That every single day it's what are the stocks? Are they up or they down? And 2008 was a really good wake-up call for a lot of us who never really thought that the system could ever come crashing down, and yet it came this close. And what we're seeing is that if you want to have a more sustainable, what do I mean by sustainable? Economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, socially and culturally sustainable. If that's what we want as a people, and I think we do, I don't think that there's really a question about that. I think the people who interrupt that or disrupt that are the people who have power, the people who utilize that power, and the people who are greedy, right? If we want to move towards something that's going to affect us all in a positive way, we have to think about either sustainability, and what somebody had brought up to me recently was that even sustainability isn't a strong enough word at this point. It's regeneration. That we actually have to regenerate the planet. We have to regenerate the earth. We have to regenerate our knowledges. We have to regenerate a lot of things, right? It's not just sustainability is probably something that's it's like in terms it's like like we say, let's be tolerant of each other. It's like it's almost at that level now. Like we can't. No, it's not about being tolerant towards one another. That's a terrible way to talk about how we should treat one another, right?
Right.
So anyway, I'm bringing this up because there has to be a significant shift in our mindset of what education means, and it has to coincide with what we think is important within our own society, right? So shifting, at least in part, away from these large transcontinental business models. We have to become more local.
But
for instance.
how can you shift the paradigm when all of us, and when I say all of us, not every single American, but the majority or a huge population in America is going to school to get a job. And that's been conditioned into us. And I know when I went to school, I took courses that wasn't required for me to graduate because I was interested in learning something outside of what I was learning. So I thought that made me a better person and made me a better citizen because I'm learning outside of this parameter that they say, well, for you to be in business, you have to get this degree.
Right.
It's no one saying for you to be a better human being and be a better person capable of creating and coming up with discoveries and cures and all that stuff to make humanity a better society. That's not the purpose. The purpose is get this piece of paper so you're not homeless.
Right.
But yet homeless is on the rise. And all other kinds of politically created drama because there's no need for nobody today to be hungry, but later on we're not producing enough food to compensate for the population growth. That's not the case today, but down in a few years or a couple of years, down the road, that may be a serious.
Well, yeah, in our country, we actually have 25 to 30% food waste. Like,
Right.
that's how much, that's not a problem for us. We waste a lot of food, which is really sad because you think about how many people don't have enough food, but yet here we are wasting 25 to a third, really. Along these lines, and I don't want to get too jargony with this. I don't want to get caught up in sort of big concepts, but there's something that Henry Giroux, who is a scholar who works up in Canada, has been making the case. He was just on Bill Moyers not too long ago on PBS, and when he said he uses this phrase now, it's called the casino capitalism. Like, that's what we're actually living in. That you have a few people who are, the amount of money that, globally speaking, the very few people on the planet have is just staggering compared to what the rest of the people on the planet have. I mean, it's just simply staggering. In our own country, the top 1% have around 40% of the nation's assets. I mean, and that's a finite number of money. It doesn't, I know it's sort of imaginary in the way that it plays out, but it's still finite in a way. Globally speaking, the top 1% has about 90% of the world's assets. I mean, it's
Right, that's
it's
true.
completely unethical. This is not sustainable for anybody at this point.
Or just we talked the last, and I don't know if it was on the air or off the air. We talked about the Walton family that own Walmart.
Right.
That's 6 family members that is worth $144 billion. That's more than the 40% of the population of the whole United States. So we're talking about 300 million people and some change. 40% of 300 and some change. 6 people have more than 40% of 300 million people in this country.
That's okay. Right.
Yeah, because see, what a conservative person would say is you're jealous or you're a failed capitalist.
Right.
You can't compete, so that's why you're jealous. It's not about being jealous. There's people out here. There's people out here that if they can pay their bills, keep a roof over their head, and have a car that works, it's fine.
Right.
Because their energy can be spent on finding cures for cancer. Their energy can be invested in making a better car or make a better whatever that needs to be improved. But when you're on a treadmill that's trying to produce results for your boss, all your energy, all your innovations is going towards the job and not to society.
Right.
Because like we said, that these corporations are consuming the planet, and the senior management is making all the money.
And the top 1% of this world or country, however you want to look at it, have figured out how to take money from every other category of life. They know how to take money from the super poor.
Right.
They know how to take money from the middle class. They know how to take money from the rich and affluent. Like, they know how to take money from everybody. They figured it out, and they've honed in on it to the point where the top 1% has hundreds of times more money than anybody else does below
Right.
that. I mean, it's not even close. Okay, so that's the situation that we're in, and then they're the ones who are dictating what school's going to be about. And it's part of that monetary flow towards their bank accounts.
Right.
And that's not okay. As a country, I don't think really any of us can get behind something like that. It's not that there shouldn't be a rich class, or it's not that everybody should have the same thing available to them.
Again,
right?
this is tied in by you're going to school to get a better job or more money. So you're not going to school to be a better human being. You're not going to school to be educated. You're not going to school to create a better mousetrap. You're going to school to be an efficient drone for corporate America.
That's right. It is.
And I'm not saying for you to be on an airport talking about you will work for some food and stuff like that. I'm not promoting that. What I'm promoting is to understand that this is the reality that we're dealing with, and yet you have people. There's 7.2 million people that were born in the United States that live outside of the United States. The Census Bureau did a report that they don't want to come back here. So yes, there is about 200,000 200,000 people want to break down the gates to get in here. But those 200,000 people are tied into the guest. I'm not trying to demonize immigrants, but the guest worker visas. They want to get in here because they're guaranteed jobs. Here you are, a United citizen that's not guaranteed a job. Even if you get a college degree, you're not guaranteed. But you have people outside this country that's guaranteed by the corporate.
They want to use and abuse low-wage workers. I mean, that,
right.
You know, whether it's the meatpacking industry, whether it's the people who are being put out to the fields to pick our foods and all. I mean, it's very human exploitive work. It's not, you know, there's a lot of safety issues there. There's a lot of people literally dying from their job. And this is not anything new. You know, I have a couple things I think would be sort of interesting, I think, to the viewers. Number one, this might seem off topic, but just stay with me for a second. Who is Helen Keller, right? We all know Helen Keller as blind. She didn't have two senses. She didn't have her sight and she didn't have her hearing. So we know the story of the miracle worker, the teacher that she worked with, and so and so. And that's usually the story that we know. But who did she become as an adult? She became somebody who was a workers' rights advocate. She was a socialist. This is the early 1900s. And why did she do that? Because she found out that the number one cause for blindness in her time was not somebody being born with it. It was people at work who were getting injuries, and those injuries were causing blindness. So she went, wait a second, that's not okay. That is not okay. That is something that should be changed right away, right? So we need to have safety and so forth and so forth and so forth, right? So she became, not just for safety issues alone, but that started her down that path of saying, we need to be better than this, right? And I think as human beings, we can all tap into something like that and say, yeah, we do need to be better than this. Now, if we look very quickly, it's easy for us sitting in the 2010s now to look back and go, you know, what happened in the 1940s, 1930s, 1950s in terms of how humans, especially white humans, were treating people who were not white humans. And we look back and we go, that was evil, that was terrible, segregationist, how could they do this, da 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 da. It's easy for us now to look back and say that kind of stuff was going on. At the time, people were not saying that. And what I mean by people is, white people were making all kinds of excuses of why they could treat people like that, right? And it goes back. It goes back into slavery. They're using God. They're using the Bible. They're using all kinds of arguments that said this is why this is okay. Right?
Scientific racism.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
Right. Now the reason why I bring that up is because what are people in 2050 and 2060 going to say about us right now? They're going to look back at us and they're going to say we were greedy, that we didn't take care of things when we should have, even though we knew we should, that we were so self-consumed. Whether you're talking about the top 1%, who's super wealthy, or you're talking about the average person who's completely consumed by the process of consumption. Like we're drowning in these pleasures that are not making us happy, by the way. They're making us feel emptier and emptier. But that's where we're at. We're talking about how can we keep ourselves sort of satiated on these very superficial pleasures all the time.
And distractions.
Right, and I know people are going to look at us at that point in time. They're going to look back and go, "How did you not do something about this? This is a completely terrible situation. How did you not change the schools? How did you not change society? How did you not change government? How did you not change the way that we're treating the planet? You know, when was the last? We have known about CO2 causing these problems for years, and yet, guess what? Last year was the year of producing the most CO2 ever. You know, that's what is wrong with us that we're not waking up to this, right? And school is a huge part of that. Schools themselves need to change, right? I mean, schools are spaces that create wounds for kids. Kids get hurt by school, right? Not all kids, but many kids do, whether it's because of testing, whether it's because they feel like they're failures, whether it's because the level of anxiety around what goes on in schools these days is just absolutely through the roof.
Right.
And then it's not being treated as something that is wrong with the schools or with the process of schooling. It's treated like there's something wrong with the kids, or there's something wrong with the families, or the families themselves are being too soft on their kids or something like that. Like that's the level of treatment that's going on. And with that said, teachers themselves know how damaging this is with the kids. They know how damaging it is on themselves, never mind their own students. Even principals know that this is not the right way for us to do education, right? So there's sort of principals at this point have become sort of the professional middle managers, and they're just being pushed around of how they need to get their test scores up. And that's all the principals hear at this particular point in time. And their own evaluations coming from the central office is based on that kind of stuff, right? So we oftentimes talk about how teachers themselves are getting, all this evaluation is based on a lot. I think it's going to be about 40-45% or so of their evaluation is going to come from test scores, which is just ridiculous. But principals are also getting that. If their schools don't get picked up in terms of tests, they're also in as much trouble, if not more, than teachers themselves are. So this really hotbed climate, this contentious, very damaging climate of schooling is where our kids are walking into all the time, and they're not being cared for, they're not being protected, they're not being asked to genuinely learn something. They're asked to become drones. They're asked to become, people who fill in bubbles accurately. That's what they're asked to become.
But what I want to say on this particular program, and the topic is education, is now there's the consumer, which I mean the citizens, the parents, the students, some teachers, they're getting a huge amount of options, and some of them might be false choices to make schools better.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go through a lot. We don't necessarily going to explain each of them because we don't have the time. But just to throw out, there's a lot of options, and many of them
too, right? That's one of the things.
Well,
right?
No, that's what you're going to cover. But I'm just going to say that, you got some people that feel that, okay, I'll send my child to this school and everything should work out. If he studies hard and the teacher is good, and everything should work out. Now, you got some students are prepared before they even get to school, and things work out. And then you got some people that have the mentality, no matter what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna give it my best, and I'm gonna also learn outside of that model. So I'm not just gonna sit there and get my education in these four walls.
Right.
I'm gonna educate outside of the wall. So those are the exceptions to the rules. But you have all these, I call them experiments. They're called pilot programs. These are experiments, and sometimes they work in certain locations. Sometimes they don't work in other locations because everybody have different priorities based on their location. If you're coming from a poor family and you're wondering where your next meal is coming from, you might want to help your parents make some income so the family survives. So your schoolwork is going to be on low priority because you don't see what you're going to get in the future. So you might go out and get a job, unless you're good in sports, or you're a musician, or some talented on some special level than above average. Then you can make money doing something else. But what they're throwing at you is they're throwing school uniforms at you. They're throwing at you Saturday academies. They're throwing at merit pays at you for the teachers. They're throwing at you same gender classrooms. They're throwing at you smaller textbooks, which I think is a good idea. They're throwing at you teacher-student ratio smaller. And I don't know, I have a source, but I don't know if it's right. They said it's the national average of 15 students to one teacher, and I got that from the National Center for Education Statistics. Why I think small, and I'll let the professor elaborate on this stuff, but why I think small textbooks are good, because the typical math book in America, and these things change, they're not written in stone. The typical math book is 32 topics. Where in the Asian schools, they have 4. They work on a core foundation, and they build something from that core foundation. Where every summer we have that summer slide, as teachers like to say it, when you did all these 180 days or whatever the school's year was of learning, and then you have a couple of months of no school, and then you go into a slide. And I'm saying, why isn't it required to read in certain books in summer when you get out of school, so you that habit or that repetition of learning, it don't diminish It's still being practiced while you're taking a break from the constantly drilling of taking tests like you mentioned earlier. Now, the last thing I want to say is, like, of course, conservatives is going to say this is America where you have different, you can't compare it to other countries. In England, if you don't go to school, the parents can go to prison. They usually go to prison when the child doesn't go to school. I'm not saying that America should incorporate that, but to give you an idea how serious education is taken in other parts of the world. In Japan, if you get arrested in Japan, you can't get out of prison unless you prove that you're proficient in mathematics and language. That means you did your time, but they're not going to release you. You can't prove that you can't do a problem and you can't write. You know, imagine in this system, I'm not recommending it here in America, but just imagine if you couldn't leave prison unless you were able to do an algebra problem and write correct paragraphs before you leave, how you would benefit society. And in China, they post your grades. China is big in shame. I'm not recommending that we shame our students because we already have self-esteem. Yeah, we already got self-esteem. But I'm saying there's different. We have to open our mind to different options, and I'm not promoting experimenting on the kids. What I'm saying is we can't let these corporations and so-called experts say this is the way we should go. There's hundreds of thousands of different routes that we can take as parents, concerned citizens, or just human beings. But also remember, for every solution, there's an unintentional consequence. Don't think that because I'm solution-based, that there ain't gonna be problems after you come up with a solution. But let's get back to the professor on these different merit pays and same gender classrooms, school uniforms, teacher-student ratios, private schools versus parochial schools versus homeschool versus magnet schools versus charter schools versus no school, and see what he has to say as better avenues. I don't even call them solution, but better avenues to try to help our young people, our adults, and just the whole structure, not catering to the corporate entities, but making you a better human being that can contribute to society. All we're contributing to is working for corporation paying taxes. That's all we're contributing to.
So I'll start off with what's been going on sort of globally with who's been getting attention for being sort of the international leaders. Schools in Finland recently have got a lot of attention in the last couple years or so, 2-3 years or so. And why is that? Finland does exactly the opposite of what we do, okay? They do not use a competitive model. They use a cooperative model. About 30 years ago, they said every school, every single school needs to be a high quality school. Every teacher needs to be a high quality teacher. And they invested a lot of time and provide a lot of supports to make all that happen. It's illegal to have, you can't have private schools in Finland, okay? Now, where do they really differ from us besides just the things I've said so far? First, they don't have standardized testing except at the very end of high school, and even then it's voluntary, okay? They're not concerned with getting this into this mentality of putting everybody on some sort of a list. What they're concerned with is how does every single classroom space become a high quality space. They don't start school until age 7. Now, why is that? Every brain-based research study shows that early childhood kids need play and they need love and support. Really. Aside from that, there's not a whole heck of a lot else that they need. They don't need to learn how to read early on. They don't need to learn how to write early on. Now that goes against a lot of things that we've been saying for a long time in this country. And we even talk about the achievement gap in terms of a prenatal achievement gap in this country, which I think is an absolute wrong way to go. But they also do a lot of things that we don't do. They have a lot of co-teaching. They are very clear about what they want in terms of people who are getting into teacher ed programs, like I teach at Central. They don't give a lot of homework because they understand that you have to have time to breathe. You have to have time to play for thinking to actually incorporate into one's head. That they're actually more aligned with what we know about effective learning than in the way that we do it. We actually, in terms of actual research, and this is the thing that gets to me about my position as a teacher, okay? When we do research and we find out what actually works, in this country, most of the time we go in the exact opposite direction. And that's a sad thing. So schools take away recess. Recess actually helps kids learn. If you don't have a student moving their body throughout the day, they won't learn, okay? That is not some sort of made up myth that that's true for adults too, but more so for kids. They actually need time to stop learning, to move their bodies, to do something creative, to play a sport, play basketball, whatever. That it actually helps them understand math and English and science better, okay? They also, the arts are huge. We, in this country, are by and large chopping the arts left and right, and the arts are huge in terms of getting kids to actually learn. Music, art, these are things that should be driving the school, not things that should be, we don't have enough money, so let's get rid of a teacher or two, okay? So there's some major things going on, and there's one.
Well, arts are not for people on our level. Art is for the elites. And that's where most of their charity goes. When you break down what a wealthy person spend to giving back, the majority of money goes to the art. It don't go to a poor person.
Well, no, it's not sexy to support homelessness.
Right? Yeah, homeless. It goes into the art. So, right. So in their observation of this whole setup, this whole plan, conditioning that's going on, art is for us. And if you're struggling economically and academically, that's not for you.
Right. And of course what we see is that when we're talking about community art projects like mural projects and things of that sort, or community gardening, which is a different kind of art for sure, but there's things that bring people in communities together, and people do this stuff on their own. Right? We don't need schools to do it. It'd be great if schools did do it. But one of the things I talk about with my PE teachers, physical education teachers, is we can't just, there's a transition going on right now where they're thinking about the class itself is not just a space where you roll out the balls and have kids just like play basketball or football, whatever, and that's it. That you actually thinking a little bit more about nutrition and physical health and that kind of thing. But I even take it to the next level and say, if you can, and I say, definitely include those things, but I say, think about neighborhood sports, just neighborhood sports alone, right? What tends to happen is that the kids who are good at basketball get together and play basketball together, and then they lock out the kids who are not so good at it, and the kids who aren't so good at it but may be interested are feeling like they can't be part of it, so they don't join in. What is that? That actually makes a fracture, right, within a community. And so I'm trying to get PE teachers to understand that the idea here is a few things. Get the elite kids to understand that it's important to include the kids who are just learning about the sport, who are trying to figure it out. Don't condemn them for not being as good at it as they are, right? And it doesn't mean you can't have competition and still have fun with it, but at least make that space so that you can do that. Because what happens? Families who wouldn't necessarily be talking to one another, the kids become friends, so the families become friends. And once that starts to happen, you get tighter and tighter communities who are more and more willing to do things locally that support one another. And so you're not so beholden to this sort of corporate model of everything that is going to feed
Right.
us and hold us.
But you did also mention something that we didn't really touch on, nutrition. Now, everybody knows, most people know the major studies in New York City where they discovered that when you have more healthy foods being consumed by the students, that their grade average went up because when they're eating better. And another study that you can find, these studies are easily found, and you don't necessarily have to go to the internet to find it, but you can go into periodics and you can go into archives, you can go to the library and do some research. Sleeping. they found out that if kids were allowed to wake up later, their performance in school drastically improved. And not only that, is if you have school that, I'm not increasing the hours, but if you have them end later, that's when the parents is coming off, or so they won't be unsupervised.
Right,
so if you talk about the sleeping two problems: the sleeping habits of the student, the eating habit of the students, the exercise habits of these are simple, non-expense that can be implemented into the educational program, and they show you that they really don't care. And let's move on since our time is limited. I also want to mention that we didn't mention on part 1 or 2 until this point, the learning styles and how people learn, and the one that's very controversial is African-centered education. First thing that come out somebody's head: why do somebody have to learn African-centered education or curriculum? Is the thing is, if you look at the Black history in this country has been destroyed. The information has been contaminated. So a lot of us don't know our history unless we do a personal journey to find that. And if school is to educate, so why can't we have a Saturday academy or a special time set aside? You don't have to have Black History Month and all that kind of stuff. Just have a certain class set aside to have people volunteer to find out more. But because the thing is, once you do that,
you're allowed to have pride in yourself, and that you're not some sort of a leftover person, or
yes,
right.
And then if we listen to our conservative opposites and Republicans, the first thing they're going to say is that if you have African-centered study, why can't we have white study? But American history is white studies.
Exactly. Yes.
Then the second thing is if you have white study, they're going to say then you need women's studies, then Hispanic studies.
It's already white studies. Yeah.
Okay. And so then we're getting away from United States history, and then you're fragmenting the whole curriculum.
Yeah. But I'll say this, because we only have a few minutes left. I completely agree with what you said. I don't disagree that there should be, if schooling was actually caring for the people that were there and not caring for the almighty dollar, because that's what we're really talking about here. The reason why we don't have those things, or the reason why people get up in arms about that, is because they care about one thing. They care about making sure that the economy that's the one thing that's driving everything in terms of thinking and in terms of practice, right? So there's that, and I think what we need to make sure that we understand is that there are things that people can do, and I know a lot of this talks probably seems hopeless, and that's not the point. We're identifying problems, but because there are things that people can do. Okay, there's parents themselves, and I know parents are taxed, parents are stressed out, parents have a lot of things going on, and don't need more things put on their plate. But for those parents that can do it, they can get involved in Board of Education meetings and start to raise their voices even more than they already do. And I know there's a lot of active parents in Hartford who are already doing that. But more of it needs to happen for sure, not just in Hartford, but other districts too. It also has to be a situation where parents are saying, you know what, my kid's not going to take these tests anymore. We're going to opt out, and here's how you do it. You have to tell your district 4 separate times that you're going to do it. And they really can't do anything about it anymore at that point. So whether your kid's in 1st or 2nd grade, or whether your kid's in 10th or 11th grade, you can do that. And that's one way. Parents are the sleeping giant in this. The change can happen with parents. Teachers, they're handcuffed. They can get fired by talking about this stuff. Okay. But I'm trying to put this out there so that parents can start to understand their power is tremendous when it comes to these topics.
And again, I want to thank the listening audience and my guests today on the topic of education. Thank you for listening, Hotep, and have a good day.
Thank you.